Happy Wednesday or happy Thursday, depending on when you are listening to this. Today we are discussing universal design for learning, and this will be the launch for what we'll be looking at for the rest of our time together in this class. So before we move ahead, I want to just make sure we're on the same page about the interest portion of our program. And have you just be ready with any questions you have about the classroom management plan in like section number 9. That's where you're crafting a discussion of how you'll use instruction to motivate middle school learners. So you can discuss using data from your interest surveys, kind of like I showed you with table topics at the beginning of last week's video, providing students with choices, etc. Like how are you going to activate interest? And then you will also, and some of you have already turned in this draft, even on Wednesday afternoon, you're going to create an interest task, either a try mind, a profile, or a raft, or a jigsaw, a menu. And you're going to make sure it's united by a common learning goal. And you are going to put a link to that and discuss it a little bit in your management plan. I will be giving you feedback on those after they are turned in. And then again, as always, be sure to cite sources. In this section, it might be a good idea to refer to the needs of adolescent learners from week 1, especially if you haven't done so already. That doesn't have to be the only citation you use, but this would be a good place to include it. Okay, so now moving ahead, I'm going to pause just to remind you to write down any questions you have about that. That's how we'll start out our time when we meet together on Zoom. All right. So what we're moving into now is a concept called universal design for learning, otherwise known as UDL. And it's actually not an educational idea to begin with. It's an architectural concept. Buildings are designed, you're now probably seeing longer handles, and that is the idea that everybody can access this handle, not just an adult, but a child, somebody in a wheelchair, or people in the fire. I don't know why this amuses me because it's not funny, but it says people in the fire smoke everywhere. I don't. So even the person in the fire with the smoke everywhere can access this handle. So it was designed, perhaps when they first started like building ramps onto buildings, they were thinking about folks who were in wheelchairs. But if you think about it, there are a lot of other people who benefit from that ramp. For instance, people with strollers or people on crutches. Or people who are carrying rolly bags with them of supplies or whatever they need for any reason. So this is that's really universal design for learning. You build it with one population in mind, and many others end up benefiting from it. And we can design our instruction the exact same way. So I'm going to share with you now what will be the beginnings of your master list of accommodations. One of the things that you're going to be including in your final motivation and management plan. A few strategies that meet this criteria for universal design for learning. One of them is that we always, always, always want to pair written content with spoken directions. We want to pair our written and our oral directions. So have something up that kids can look at, but also explain it. If we just explain, they'll be confused. If we just post, we'll have to have an awful lot of text to explain it, and that can be overwhelming to kids. So we want to pair. Now, why is this helpful? This is helpful to any kid who's in middle school, but it's especially helpful for students who are learning English. If they see the words, they might do better picking up. They actually learn how to speak sooner than they learn how to read. So hearing it might make more sense. However, you might have a student who actually is from a country where they were learning English and they were learning it academically. And so in that case, the words will help them better. If we do even better, we'll put some visuals next to those words as keys to what those words mean. So, but that doesn't just benefit students who are learning English. It also benefits students who have attention problems. because it's very hard to pay attention. If somebody's just talking, they can just drift off and not pay attention anymore. But if it's written, it'll help them solidify. It's helpful for students with autism. They also you need to make sure your directions are right, spot on for them. And that kind of leads us to our next, oh dear. Theo is whining. I guess he's just going to have to whine while I finish this. Okay, so post and maintain a schedule or an agenda. This is something that, yes, principals like to see this, but why? We want to include the order of the events, but not the exact times. And I'll tell you why in a minute. We want it to be in the same place each day, and we want to refer to it when we move from item to item. That helps students who are learning English make connections about, okay, we're doing this, we're doing this. It helps students with anxiety, emotional behavioral disorder, anxiety, to know what's coming and kind of feel like they're ready for it. It helps students with autism for the same reason. It helps students with attention issues attend when you move from one to the other. It also helps students with autism to not put the exact times, because if then there are some students who are very, very detail oriented as part of their autism. And if we put a time and then we're a minute off, it can really throw them off. So just having the order of events instead of necessarily the times is usually a better bet. Okay, so another technique is highlighting texts. This idea came from, was actually shared with Carol Tomlinson back quite a few years now. And this teacher still had textbooks, and he had a set of textbooks in his room, and he had students who were learning English. And so he realized that when he asked kids to read a chapter in class, his students who were learning English got through about 15% of the chapter. And that is usually the introduction. And so he decided, the introduction, like the first paragraph. So he decided, if that's all they can read, I would rather have them read the most important parts. So he went through and highlighted what he thought the key points were. 15% of the chapter, the key points were. He's like, if they're going to spend all of that time reading and concentrating so hard, I'd rather have them concentrating on the most important stuff. And man, I would appreciate that. Like, think about you. If you go to another country and they're like, okay, we're getting ready to go to this, this site here, you have to read this first. And it's a huge page. You would appreciate having somebody who is a native speaker highlight all of the key places if you're not fluent, so that you can spend your time concentrating on those. So what was cool about that is that not just the students who were learning English benefited from it. The learning specialists wanted to use it with their students who were having trouble with attention, because it helped them kind of key back in as they were reading the chapter. It kind of drew them to attention when they saw the highlighting. And it helped anybody with a reading issue. I know none of you are studying that, but any students who had trouble reading and processing. By the same token, using recordings can really help a lot of students. You can record your text or your directions, or like I'm doing right now, so that students can listen, and sometimes they do better hearing it than they do reading it. It can be used by students to record their thinking during group work or before writing. I do this when I work with teachers a lot. One of the things that they say has been the most transformative for them is letting kids talk out what they want to write before they write. And then they can listen to themselves and write. And that's not just for English. That's in any class where they have to write something. If they can record what they want to say first and then listen to themselves and write it out, it goes much better. It helps them with their anxiety. And it's also very affirming, because they are scaffolding themselves, if that makes sense. Instead of somebody giving them a scaffold, they are their own scaffolding in that situation. I worked with one of our former JMU grads was a student teaching at Harrisonburg High School, and did that with a student who it seemed like they could tell you how to solve the problem, but they couldn't work the problem. And so they started asking him to record himself telling them how to solve the problem, and then he would listen to it and work it on paper. So there's just something very respectful about that, but also just a huge, huge help in terms of help supporting students. Another helpful tool that can serve lots of different students is Rewordify. Rewordify is you honestly, if you just go to rewordify.com, you'll see this. You can you copy and paste some text into to a box, and it rephrases it for you and makes it simple. It simplifies the language basically, and it highlights what has been changed so that like you're the ultimate decision maker about whether that's an appropriate simplification. But they do it for you, and you might have to go in and tweak a couple of things, but it's done for you. So that's an awesome tool. And then talking chips. Love these. When I used these in a Socratic seminar, and then I started using them in other situations when I had groups of students, sometimes even in small groups, I would do this. Each student gets a number of chips, for instance, 3. One chip is one turn to talk. And then students, if they run out of chips, they have to stop talking. That's it. So the first time I would use it, my kids who loved to talk would use all their chips, and then they would have to be quiet for the rest of the time, which they hated. So the next time we did it, they were more cautious about, they were more careful. They chose their moments better. It also even the playing field for students who were a little bit shyer, a little more reticent to talk, because then when everybody had gotten there, when the kids who didn't talk so much, were more restrained, then those students who were reticent had more openings to be able to talk and the encouragement to do so. We also had the general rule that number 2 right there. No. Well, the general rule is the person with the most amount of chips left goes first. So if 2 people start talking at once, then the person who has 2 chips gets to talk instead of the person with 1 chip left. I hope that makes sense. That again helps kids like yield. Like, I've already spoken twice. I yield to you who has only spoken once. Again, very respectful. So that helps students with attention problems because of the whole, like just the impulsivity that goes along with that. It helps students with autism who also sometimes have a hard time not speaking when they know a lot about something. So those chips are a tangible way to help them not talk when they know the answer they really want to tell you. It helps students with emotional and behavioral disorders who have just problems blurting out. It helps students who are learning English because it provides them with the space to get to speak, with the time to think about it, and the space, and helps their classmates honor them because they might take a little bit more time. Finally, the Zen Zone. You know all about this. But again, Shelby designed this for her students with emotional behavioral disorders, just to kind of give them a place to cool down. But she realized this works for students with autism on the spectrum, works with students who are having trouble paying attention, gives them a place to go focus. It works with a lot of different kids for very different reasons. It can also be a great place for somebody to go if they just need a little bit more time to finish a task. So if it takes a little bit more time for students who are learning English, that's a safe place to go to finish what they're doing. So all of those are different strategies that are considered universal design for learning, and they're going to come in very handy in 3 different ways. They're going to come in handy in terms of the teaching tool that you are going to be creating for your exceptionality. They're going to come in very handy because you'll see they're already listed as the first strategies on your accommodation list. And they're also going to be helpful if you want to talk about them in your management plan. So what are each of these 3 things? What's involved with each of them? First of all, just to remind you, here are your exceptionality groups. I know they're in Canvas and I know you're working together, but there you are, just to be reminded. I want to tell you about your focus areas for your teaching tools. You guys are right now in the process of gathering information about your exceptionality. If you are studying ADHD, I want you to focus your attention on accommodations rather than on medications. So don't necessarily talk about Ritalin. We can't count on the fact that a student will be medicated. So what can we do? Despite with or without medication, what can we do? And do focus on students, not adults. We're again focusing on middle school students. If you are studying the autism spectrum, please focus on autistic disorder. Asperger's syndrome is becoming more and more of a passé term, but you'll still find it in some of the literature. It's basically just, if we think of autism as a spectrum, it's down here a little bit lower, like lower on the spectrum. So focus on those because that's what you're going to see in your classroom most likely. They are much more common than Rett, CDD, or PDD, NOS, not otherwise specified. So those are your two that you want to focus on. And then emotional and behavioral disorders, if you would narrow your focus to anxiety, oppositional defiant disorder, and conduct disorder, that would be great. If you'd like to, you can add one of the following, otherwise it would just be too long. Adjustment disorder, major depressive disorder, or OCD. These are the three that you'll run into most frequently. These can also be included, one of those. Okay, so that's where you need to focus. So your teaching tool, what is a teaching tool? Your teaching tool, you can make a video just like I'm doing right now. If you're familiar with Nearpod is a thing that can help you just do a whole presentation right in one place. You could do a Prezi if you wanted to. Interactive slides where it's a slideshow, but there's something, we're not just reading it. There's something that we can click on and perhaps hear your voice, click on it and see a video, etc. Regardless of your teaching tool, you should include these things. First of all, the characteristics of your exceptionality and how it manifests itself in the classroom, how to recognize it. That's one of the things that you took notes on for today. A human face on the exceptionality. So you want to go out and look for a case study, an interview, a role play, a video. There's tons of stuff on YouTube. Help us understand and empathize what it feels like to be a student with that exceptionality, what it feels like, to help us to put us in the shoes of somebody who struggles to pay with attention disorder, who is on the spectrum, who has an emotional or a behavioral disorder, so that we understand what it feels like. You'll see a big star next to this one rather than an appropriate icon, because this is the most important one. This is where your energy should be spent, and that's how to support students with this exceptionality in the classroom. Share a list of accommodations, and include a few that are technology based. Try to do that. If you know that's maybe a little bit of a like that. Find at least one that's technology based, and explain where in the management plan they would fall. So, for instance, the Zen Zone. That would fall in my physical environment section of it. The talking chips, that would fall into curriculum and instruction. The Zen Zone, I could also talk about falling into behavioral or disorder, the behavior contract discipline. So you're going to talk about your accommodations and then where you see it falling. Is it an environment thing? Is it a getting to know students thing? Is it a group interaction thing? Talking chips could also be talked about in terms of group interactions. So you're helping us see where they fall. You'll be happy your classmates are doing this for you because it's going to make your work a lot easier in the long run. Next week, we're going to look at students who are learning English. And so you are going to, in the spirit of universal design for learning, you're going to also give a brief attention to how the needs of students learning English can be met at the same time. So maybe you come up with a list of accommodations for students who are struggling with attention disorders, and you can say, hey, out of those things, these three things would work with students who are learning English as well. And then finally, you're going to give us an example of a task or a set of directions, or you'll see this in the slide. I'm sorry, this is covered up. Something that you would see in a middle school classroom, like a before and after. So it could be a set of directions. It could be a task, a word problem. I'll give you an example of that next week when I share about English language learners. This is, and again, this is where your energy is. So that is your teaching tool. Pause, take a breath, because I'm going to talk to you about the accommodations list next. But write down any questions you have about the teaching tool right now so that you'll be ready to ask them when we meet together on Zoom in a few. All right. Next order of business is your accommodations list. If we're thinking in order, the teaching tool comes first. That's going to be due before the accommodations list because you're going to learn from your classmates' teaching tool to be able to compile your accommodations list. You're going to work with the members of your exceptionality group. And just as we did with the other things we've done, one group member save a copy of the Google Sheet on Canvas and rename it with your exceptionality in the title, and then share that with your group mates. Find a way to chat, and then use the PowerPoint from this week as well as the notes from your exceptionality readings, and then start to add some accommodations to the Google Sheet based on what you read. But then after next week's class, and that's when you're going to learn about English language learners, and then after the following class, that's when students are going to present their teaching tools, you'll add more accommodations to this sheet. And you'll also indicate which populations would be served by each accommodation. So I've gotten you started. This Google Sheet is in Canvas. I've gotten you started with the accommodations that I talked to you about today. And I said that they are appropriate for students learning English. You'll get to decide when you study your exceptionality if you think they're good for yours as well and put a check there. And then you'll add more accommodations that you find as you do your research. And if you're an attention person, you're like, well, they work for all. Obviously, they're mine. They work for all. But then you'll also say, that could work with English language learners. And then you'll hear your classmates' presentations and go, oh, that could also work for autism. That could also work for emotional behavior. And you'll also find new accommodations to add when your classmates get to that portion of the presentation, this one right here. So here's where you're getting your raw materials for this accommodations list. Either you yourself when you study yours or when you hear your classmates' presentations. And those things go directly into this. And then the last part of this is by the 23rd of April, you're going to post your completed accommodations in the assignment on Canvas. It's a group assignment. I'm going to do the same thing, give you participation points, give you feedback if you need any, like you forgot your technology tools. And then you can link it in your management plan. You can fix it and link it in your management plan. All right, so that's the accommodations list. Pause and write down your questions about that. Okay, now, finally, we're going to talk about how this is going to play into your management plan. And this is the last thing you're going to do, not for a couple of weeks. So don't get stressed out about it. If you think you will, then you don't need to listen to it. You can skip this part. But if you want to know what's coming, in your management plan, you're going to proactively discuss accommodations by explaining your accommodations plan and linking to it. Like, you'll just say, hey, it's very important that I make sure my class is accessible to everybody. I will make sure that I adjust blah, blah, blah to make sure that everyone has access. Look at this link here and see how thorough and smart I am with all the things I know. Then you'll pick at least 5 examples of how you would use specific accommodations to support multiple special needs, including ELLs, students with autism, ADHD, and students with emotional and behavioral disorders. And you're going to reference other parts of your plan. So what might that look like? I would encourage you to check out this link on your own. We're going to go here right now. This is one of the plans from last year. It's not one of the exemplars. I just remember really liking this one, so I bookmarked it. Here's her accommodations. Here's her AMLE quote. Hey, look at this. Google Doc, same thing you're doing, but don't go here and cheat. And then she's got her affective learning environment. She's going to use a Calm Corner, and it helps these students, and that's how. Her physical learning environment, a class schedule, and it's going to help these students, and she explains how. So, and then classroom rules and discipline. I'm going to use a contract. It helps these students, and she explains how. Grading and homework. I'm going to use recording devices, and she explains which students it will help and why. Curriculum instruction, graphic organizer. So this is this is down the road. This is the last part of your management plan, and it has to be last because you've already done, the other parts. So you'll have to have the other parts done before you can do that, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So pause And if you have questions about this that you need answered right away, write them down. If you're like, I will think about this later, then you can think about this later. All right. So, wrapping things up here, what's your to-do list? Right now, work collaboratively to complete your exceptionality research. I've got a graphic organizer on Canvas to help you if you want, and to create your teaching tool. You can begin adding to your accommodations list as you find out, as you learn about accommodations for your exceptionality. Compose. Continue working on the interdisciplinary part if you have not finished that, and the instruction as management, the interest part of your management plan. Revise your interest task as directed in my feedback. And then read and post your interactions. You're going to examine the Canvas resource on working with ELLs. Take notes on 10 important things total from, there are 3 sources I'll show you in a minute, and then you'll post them in the usual spot. So this is what's due next week. And I hope that, I kind of gave you a look ahead at everything that's due for the rest of the semester, really. But this is where your focus is for next week. Gathering your resources to create your teaching tool, making sure those parts of your management plan are done so you can just be done with that and focus on this last thing. And then get ready to read and discuss ELLs. Let me show you the Canvas module really quickly, just so that's not anything of concern. Here, week 12, there's a link to your exceptionality organizer. These are the 5 things you need to include in your presentation in your teaching tool. Somebody has already started. That's good. Make sure you save a copy and put your things into, or maybe I did that. I think I don't know. No, your exceptionality would be down here. Team members are down here. I don't know if I did that, if you did that, but there, that's there. And then, okay, so then I've also got the accommodations template started for you that you saw right here. And then you can click in and add, when you learn about yours, and then you can add accommodations here. So those are in there. And then by the time you get to week 12, you'll see obviously the slides that you just saw as well as the video. And then for week 13, you're going to read 3 sources. You're going to read this Cultivating Connections with Diverse Families from AMLE. You're going to read this Cult of Pedagogy. Love her. 12 Ways to Serve ELLs. And then you're going to pick one content area chapter and read that. Pretend like this isn't here. I have this hidden because I'm going to explain that stuff rather than make you read about it. So you can choose either content area. You don't have to read both. Choose the one that you are the most interested in, or the one that's shortest. I don't care. But read all 3 of those, and then you're going to, as the slide says, have an important things. Oh, gee, Manelli. I'm sorry. Who even says that? Theo's whining outside and it's throwing me off my game. So that's 10 important things total from all 3 sources combined. Again, you'll post in your usual spot. Okay. I look forward to seeing you soon. I know this feels like a lot, but it's basically everything that you need for the rest of the semester, and one step depends on the next. So just do it in order. And we can talk about anything that's causing you undue anxiety. All right. I will see you all soon. Bye.